Welcome back to the cryptoworld channel, everyone. My name is Josh, and right now Bitcoin is forming a huge warning signal on the daily time frame that I will talk about in just a moment. And later in this video, I'll be comparing these two Bitcoin crashes together to look at some early signs of a potential recovery. And on top of all of that, the Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index is now at the lowest level we've been at since July this year. I'll be covering all of that and more in this video, so definitely stick around all the way to the end so that you're not missing out on any of this important information. And just before we jump into it, make sure to leave a like on the video down below. And if you're new to the channel, you might as well subscribe with notifications turned on for more updates just like this every single day. But with all of that out of the way, let's get straight into what this video is about. So right here on the Bitcoin US dollar charts on the daily time frame. And as you can see, when we draw this line of supports between these two lows right here, that perfectly connects to this low that we've just seen for the crash so far. And this also means we are potentially forming a giant head and shoulders pattern on the daily time frame. But I want to make it clear that right now this pattern is not confirmed because we still have not seen any sort of right shoulder actually form just yet. So while this pattern can act as a potential warning signal for Bitcoin holders, at the time of filming this video, it's just something to keep an eye on because once again, this pattern only confirms if we do end up forming a right shoulder and a break below this neckline, which by the way, this neckline is coming in at approximately 42,000 US dollars. With that being said, looking in the daily RSI, we are incredibly close to oversold territories. And so historically speaking, that means that we are due for a decent bounce sometime soon, which we have already seen a decent bounce back to the upside from the bottom of this wick. And obviously that has formed this huge wick to the downside, which means that there are a lot of buyers down at these prices. So because of that, once again, we could experience a little bit more of a bounce here moving forward before then we come back down and form another low. And so at that stage, it's just important for Bitcoin to remain above this neckline at around 42 to 43,000. But considering the size of this pattern, if we do end up forming a right shoulder, honestly, it would most likely take us into 2022 before we even potentially complete this pattern, which again, there's no guarantee of this pattern even completing. But yeah, just taking a look at the left shoulder, for example, that was around 2 months in length. And now jumping into something that is very bullish for Bitcoin right now, and that is the Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index sitting on extreme fear. I covered this yesterday on the channel because of course we were sitting in extreme fear just yesterday, and I'll let you know yesterday that it's actually quite likely for at least a little while longer we will remain in extreme fear considering the recent market movements. But not only have we just remained in extreme fear today, if you're looking at the actual value of this index, we have plunged further into extreme fear. And what's very interesting about an 18 on the Fear and Greed Index is the fact that that's the lowest value we've seen ever since July this year. Once again, as you can see right now, we are sitting on 18, and we did not even go that low at the end of the September correction. The last time this Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index was sitting this low was actually on the 21st of July this year. And if you want to know what Bitcoin was doing on the 21st of July, taking a look at the daily chart for Bitcoin, right here was the 21st of July, just as Bitcoin was bottoming out and getting ready for another major move back to the upside. But one important thing to mention is, yes, that was the last time we were at these sort of levels in the Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index. But if you look immediately before that date right there, the 21st of July, we were in extreme fear for around 2 whole months. And by the way, that's what this chart is just here. The subscribers would already know about this chart, but for the new viewers on the channel, these green areas on this chart are basically the times where we were sitting in extreme fear on the Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index. And historically speaking, even though they don't necessarily mark the exact bottom, they give us a pretty good idea on when to accumulate Bitcoin, generally speaking. Of course, that's not financial advice. That's just telling you what this indicator has done for Bitcoin in its past. So looking at what Bitcoin did back during these times of extreme fear, you'll notice that the room to the downside was extremely limited. Once we entered into extreme fear, we didn't really go that much lower before we then bottomed out and began a trend reversal back to the upside. And so that is exactly why I am currently dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin, and I will continue to slowly dollar cost average into Bitcoin, especially while we're still sitting in extreme fear. Now comparing the current Bitcoin crash to the March 2020 crash, because I'm sure you can see the similarities between this crash and that last crash. But for the beginners out there, I will point them out. First of all, a huge wick to the downside is a bullish sign showing us that we are potentially at a bottom. Also, having a huge spike in volume is another sign that we are potentially at a bottom, like what we saw back in March 2020. And having the price oscillators, so the RSI and the MACD, starting to flip bullish again with a new uptrend forming in both of these price oscillators, that can also act as a very strong sign showing us that we have bottomed out and we're getting ready for the next major move back to the upside, which right now we have not seen just yet. So technically speaking, we have not confirmed the recovery just yet, but we do have some early signs on the charts showing us that we could possibly be at the bottom. And then once the RSI begins an uptrend and once we see a bullish cross in the daily MACD, those are just extra confirmations for us to confirm that we are finally beginning the recovery. And when you're talking about a potential recovery out of a crash like like this? Well, first of all, looking back here during March 2020, this recovery that we saw back then was an extremely bullish recovery. An example of a little bit more of a bearish recovery, if you want to call it that, is looking back during May, June, and July this year, because obviously during all of those months just there, we were not really recovering. We were basically in a huge sideways consolidation, and then we only started to recover a few months after the initial crash, whereas March 2020, we began to recover almost immediately after the crash. But with that being said, measuring out from the bottom of the March 2020 crash up to the point where we basically fully recovered back towards the previous high, that was around 56 days after we saw the huge crash to the downside. So you're talking about 2 months worth of price action before the price finally recovered back towards the highs that we were previously sitting at. So as I said yesterday, don't expect an extremely fast recovery, within a few days or even within a week. It's most likely going to take at minimum at least a few weeks, but possibly a couple months before we come back up towards the all-time highs. But with that being said, anytime we experience a lot of bearish price action like what we have been experiencing over the past couple weeks, all of this is just giving us a huge opportunity to get in at cheaper prices, exactly like what we saw at the end of the March 2020 crash. As that crash was happening and immediately after the crash, there was a lot of panic in the markets. We were in extreme fear, and a lot of people at that stage thought Bitcoin was dead and basically just going to zero. But during those times of panic, that's when you get, once again, the biggest opportunities to get in at the cheapest prices. Of course, none of that is financial advice. That is just telling you what has happened for Bitcoin in its past. And that's just giving you an insight of my Bitcoin strategy, which is right now to accumulate Bitcoin. Of course, just dollar cost averaging, not going all in at any given price level, because it's not impossible for us to experience a little bit more bearish price action. And quickly updating you on the Bitcoin funding rates across all of these exchanges, this is very bullish. Anytime we're seeing extremely negative funding rates across the board, this is simply a bullish sign. When we see positive funding rates, the long positions have to pay the short positions a fee to keep the long positions open, usually every 8 hours. And the fee that the long positions have to pay to the short positions is simply whatever the funding rate is at that time. So for example, at a 0.01% funding rate, the long positions usually every 8 hours would have to pay 0.01% of their entire position to the short positions in order to keep the long positions open. But then when we see negative funding rates, it's basically the exact opposite. It's the short positions paying the long positions the fee, which is calculated through the funding rate. This is just a mechanism built into all of these exchanges to help balance out the market during overly bearish or overly bullish times, because as more and more people start flipping bearish and entering into short positions, that brings the funding rates further into negative territory, making it more expensive to short Bitcoin. And then once again, it's the exact opposite. After we see a huge pump and everyone starts flipping bullish and entering into long positions, that's when we see the funding rates flip extremely positive, and then it becomes very expensive to hold that long position. So basically, the more negative that these funding rates go, the more short positions are currently active across all of these exchanges. And if the Bitcoin price is not going to the downside in the shorter term, all of those short positions are losing money on these funding rates. And so once again, if Bitcoin doesn't really go to the downside in the immediate short term, and especially if it starts going further to the upside, that will force those short positions to close their positions. And when you close a Bitcoin short position, you have to buy back into Bitcoin in order to close that position, which obviously would be adding an extra buying pressure onto the Bitcoin price, which will push the Bitcoin price further to the upside, which would mean more short positions will have to close their positions, creating more buying pressure and so on and so forth. And that's also known as a short squeeze. And the possibility of a short squeeze happening increases as these funding rates get more and more negative. But as I mentioned yesterday, it's still important to keep an eye on whatever the stock market is doing. It's definitely going to be interesting to watch the Monday market open, because it is quite likely if the stock market dumps on Monday, Bitcoin and crypto in general could stay a little bit more bearish in the shorter term while the stock market is dumping. But if the stock market sees a significant bounce on Monday, then that would really help Bitcoin and crypto in general in the recovery back to the upside. And if you want to get extra real-time updates throughout the day on the crypto markets just like this, definitely make sure you're following me over on my Twitter, and the link to my official Twitter account is in the description down below and also in the pinned comment. And from time to time, you'll also get my finest pick of crypto memes. If you enjoyed this video or got something valuable out of it, please make sure to leave a like down below. And if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe with notifications turned on for more updates just like this every single day. And before you click off, make sure you're checking out one of these uploads if you haven't already. I've got a video over here showing you how I earn passive income every day on my crypto holdings. And I've also got a trading tutorial video showing you how I place trades over on Bybit. But anyway, that is it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in the next video.